All right, welcome back, everyone. We are here with our first session for the day. I want to welcome Angela Howard, who I've had the pleasure of, getting to know over the last few months. And it's a funny story how I actually met Angela. It was through a very well-known and close friend of mine, Lori Ruderman. And so Lori spoke at the last virtual social HR camp, and I asked her, Lori, I need to find a really amazing speaker, someone who, can wow the audience and who is up and coming and knows what they're doing. And she said, Jeff, I have one person for you, Angela Howard. I said, fine, thank you very much. Done. So I reached out to Angela, and the rest is history. So I just want to give you a bit of a sort of overview of her. So Angela is a Chicago native, which is one of my favorite American cities, with a passion around redefining HR and transforming businesses into catalysts for social change and impact. Her background in org psychology and 10 plus years of a leading HR talent and culture team has been the aspiration for starting her own company. Awesome. And her business focuses on helping businesses roadmap and evolve their workplace culture through connection to purpose, sustainable behavior change, conscious mindset shift, and the leadership development. Angela is going to take us through three major and timely global themes: the trifecta for transformation that are shaking up the world of work and point to a larger discussion around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. This actionable and engaging conversation will help ground us for the rest of the experience today. I am going to remind everybody, before I hand over the floor, off to the right of your screen, there's a chat. If you have some amazing thoughts and you want to engage in a sidebar conversation, use the chat function. I'm just going to write hello. And right next to chat is Q&A. If you have any questions, post your questions here. I'll be moderating a Q&A towards the end of this session. And if you want to be so daring, you can actually raise your hand and we can invite you on stage, right? And so I am going to hand it over to Angela. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you so much for allowing me to be in your space today. I know that you all could have been in many different places. And, my hope for today is that we're going to use this time together to reflect, to kick off this amazing, crucial, timely topic and talk about ways that we can personally and collectively create more inclusive and cohesive workplaces and experiences that also drive business outcomes, but also create equitable experiences for each individual in our organizations and the people we serve. So Jeff alluded to the topic that I was going to take us through today to get our brains primed for the rest of the session. But really, this kickoff discussion is meant to set the stage around the concept that business is a driving force for social change. We have a hand, we have a responsibility in this conversation. And we will be focusing on three major transformative trends around this shift. And this is what I call the Transformation Trifecta. So my hope is that, we're going to kind of condense and consolidate all of the data, all the things that you're hearing that can be confusing, but let's simplify it. Let's acknowledge it. And then that is going to give us the fuel we need to move forward. But first, I want to ensure our brains are primed and ready for these tough discussions we're going to have today. We're going to be talking about some heavy topics. Wesley's speech earlier, the Q&A with Jeff, it hit my heart. And we're going to be digging deeper into those topics. And so we're going to be tackling some tough things together. And I want us to make sure that we're mindful in this conversation. Many of you might be rushing from other meetings or thinking about what you're going to eat for lunch later. And so this is an opportunity for a mindful moment. And research tells us that learning, innovation, resilience, all of that stems from bringing an intentional growth mindset. And there's actually evidence that says if you can just take a moment to think about what you're grateful for, you open up neurotransmitters in your brain that allow you to be more receptive to growth and development and learning. So I want to just ask this question. What are you thankful for today? Just take a moment, put it in the chat. What are you thankful for today? It could be anything. It could be your warm, fuzzy socks that you have on right now, or for the sun in the sky, for your health. Yes, Tanya. Yes. Same. Family. Yes. What else? Family and friends. My husband who's going through some challenges. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. Family and your job. Thankful for the beautiful weather and my husband. Thank you, Katie. So this is just an opportunity again to just be mindful for a moment. Jeff did a fabulous job introducing me, and what I'm thankful for is him. Jeff, I'm thankful for you for bringing us all together today to have these discussions, to share, to talk about action. And I wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself and my personal leadership journey. You know, first and foremost, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, I'm a wife. I consider myself a social entrepreneur. My focus is, my background is in HR and OD, but I'm a trained organizational psychologist. But I like to say, I tend to have cultural anthropologist tendencies because I study workplaces and organizations, and I'm especially passionate about scaling good in business and making workplaces more human and changing mindset, behaviors, and impact. So that is really kind of the lens that I am bringing to you all today as we talk through this topic. Which leads me to why we're here. If you're staying close to workplace and work-life trends, which all of us have to be doing working in this space, you're probably overwhelmed with the data, the perspectives, the information that is being thrown at you from different vantage points. And so I'm hoping that we can just cut through that, cut to the meat of what's happening, and connect this back to our conversation today about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in your organizations and how those can be a force for change in the space. And so there are three main themes we're going to be talking about today and that are worth noting in this conversation. The first one is the Great Resignation, the Great Reshuffle, whatever you want to call it. This is shaping up to be a massive reshuffling of talent across our organizations. An aging and emerging workforce. Where we used to have 5 generations in the workplace, we're now seeing baby boomers taking this opportunity to retire. And we're also creating a massive skill gap as that generation is leaving, and now we have an entry point for Gen Z talent. And then, not to mention, millennials are now moving into leadership positions. So there's a massive change happening around expectations, the social contract around work because of this change. And speaking of Gen Z, the explosion of accountability and expected action around social responsibility and conscious business practices is at the top of everyone's mind right now, but especially Gen Zers. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the research, what we're seeing, some of the sentiments behind this next generation. So let's start with the Great Resignation. This sounds eerily similar to some of you probably to the war on talent. There have been a lot of terms that have been thrown out there over the decades, really around this idea of talent leaving or rethinking work. But this has some nuances. This is a little bit different. We're seeing a growing gig economy, the emerging workforce, and evolving social contracts of what talent actually expects out of the workplace. And add on the layer of the trauma and the change around the pandemic and how that's had us all rethinking about life and how we want to spend our time and energy. All of these forces are the perfect storm. And we're seeing about 40% of workers, and it's growing, are considering leaving or changing their jobs while the labor market continues to struggle with millions of jobs because of labor shortages. So again, it's just a perfect storm, that will require a new mindset of nimbleness and how we manage and develop and create mobility around talent. So, talent hoarding is gone, it's out the window. We really need to be rethinking how our organizations are actually a talent marketplace where we are thinking about our capabilities and diversity within our organizations and how that is interacting with how we obtain talent, but also retain and nurture talent. And it's also going to take a mindset shift around blanket solutions. So we've been on this kick around employee engagement for a while, employee engagement surveys, gathering data, and then having these blanket solutions that we think are going to change the outcome of culture and employee engagement. And a lot of those things are working. I'm not saying these things are not working, but I think we have to start thinking as we're scrambling to understand what and how we're going to keep our most talented and diverse and brilliant team members. It really comes down to this. The companies that will be able to attract and retain talent will be focused on equity and fairness versus equality. And this really means a more personalized and diverse employee experience with multiple options because we're not all the same. We don't come from the same background. And by the way, talking about systems of oppression, sadly, the workplace has that foundation. Systemic racism, prejudice is built into the system of the workplace. So we have to rethink what that means and making sure that we're taking into consideration the personalized experience of each individual on our team and the diversity that that brings. And this also takes increased empathy with leadership. Leaders need to start to be more empathetic. We are changing the definition of leadership. We're redefining it. It's no longer textbook leadership and constructs that we've been taught. We have to learn to understand our team members. And to do that, we have to know them at a human level. We have to understand how to adequately allocate our resources to parts of the workplace experience to be equitable and not equal. Oops, sorry, I went backwards. So wanted to get your perspective really quickly. And I am open, if we have some time, Jeff, to bring someone on stage if you'd like. You could also use the chat, but I want to hear from you. How has the Great Resignation caused you to rethink equity versus equality? Any thoughts, or anyone who would like to come on stage to have the discussion and share with the rest of the team today? Let's see. And to do that, please raise your hand.
I'd love to see someone come on stage.
Come on, be brave.
Come on now.
Kick us off right.
I can always pick on somebody.
Uh-oh. You don't want Jeff to pick on you.
Nobody wants to come on stage. What about Lynn? Hey, Lynn, do you want to come on stage?
Oh, I see Rose.
Here we go. We got somebody. All right, Rose Duggan. Here we go, Rose. You ready? Here we go. I'm going to hide myself.
Okay. Hey, Rose.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for your bravery. Thanks for...
No problem. You guys can hear me okay? Or you all can hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. I've been finding, working heavily in recruitment, where I work kind of overall in people and culture. So I'm tied into both recruitment, but then also overall employee experience and the culture of the organization. And I'm seeing that there's a lot more agency, both within candidates joining organizations and in existing employees who, have so many opportunities at this point. And so companies are having to factor in equity in order to retain top talent and also attract top talent. So things like, for example, mandatory return to the office. You have to look at who's this going to benefit? Is it going to benefit the executives that are working there who have nannies and six-figure salaries and cars and parking spots? And who's going to have the most trouble? It's going to be single parents. It's going to be women. And things that seem as innocuous as a woman getting ready, going back to the office, you have to put on makeup and you have to blow dry your hair. That's 45 more minutes for women and women identifying people than it is for men. And so you have to factor all of these things in that wouldn't necessarily have been important before, so that candidates and employees are looking at an organization that are going to be their best overall experience, not just for their career, but holistically for their lives.
Brilliant, Rose. Yeah, I love that. And, I think, I mentioned earlier the workplace as a system, right? And who it's benefited originally, and it's evolved from that, right? We now have a semi-diverse workforce. Really, the lack of diversity is happening at the top, but there's also a piece, I read an article actually, Rose, where even when we look at, we're starting to see some data around who is opting in to come back to the office, right? So organizations who have given the choice, and it's the people who the workplace was designed for. It's white men who are saying, I want to come back to the office. And then you've got, the women and people of color who are saying, nope, I feel I have not felt more like I belong ever in my entire career than I do now, because I have this choice. And so that scares me a little bit, to be honest, because it might even cause more disparity. So now the people who are coming to the office, getting the face time, getting the recency effect from leadership, are going to get more face time. And then you're going to have this whole group of people who have been marginalized in the past are going to be even more marginalized because there's no face time. So we have to consider those things. It's very complex. It's not easy to kind of factor in all of the pieces. So
yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest challenges of building a hybrid work environment is the equality of opportunity or equity of opportunity.
Yes. Well, Rose, thank you so much for your bravery. I really appreciate you coming on. Great discussion, and just really, really kind of a refined tactical piece, such as recruiting, I think just reflects this idea of equity versus equality. So thank you. So let's go ahead, and so we talked about the Great Resignation. We talked about this idea of, all of us are scrambling to find ways to retain and attract talent, and it really comes to equity versus equality. We also have some changes happening with generational diversity in our workforce, and an aging workforce, especially with our large population of baby boomers retiring, and add the rapid pace of disruption and that has created this widening skill shortage. The value of our talent and learning programs will directly equate to our ability to actively identify and future-proof organizational capabilities. We're going to have to think differently about assessing the gap and reskilling our teams to close this gap, because this is a huge change. This is a huge shift for us. And one of these major gaps is actually centered around leadership skills. And firsthand as HR practitioners that no mindset shift, no transformation will occur if your leaders are lacking the skill to build a more inclusive workforce. So you can have all the diversity programs, the strategies you'd like, but if your executive team, if your leadership team is not living and breathing and walking the walk, you're gonna have a really, really hard time. You're gonna be in a hamster wheel of trying to create change. And so auditing your leadership development programming for inclusive behavior development and succession planning, and making sure that diversity of pipelining is at the forefront, will be a critical part of this movement, and making sure we are closing that gap and ensuring that we're also building the right leadership capabilities along the way. And the model I have up here that you see on the screen, this is comes from DDI. Some of you may be familiar, Development Dimensions International. They're a leader in competency modeling and leadership assessments, and they publish a global leadership forecast each year. And really it's focused on, forecasts around what are we missing as far as skill gaps and leadership gaps. And this year they surveyed more than 15,000 leaders, about 2,000 HR folks, and 2,000 organizational leaders across industries, levels, race, gender, and other demographics. And so the model you see here actually outlines what they found to be the most critical leadership skills to lead the future of work. So the most critical leadership skills to lead the future of work. And the survey identified that only 28% of leaders are actually being developed on these skills. That's huge. That means our gap is like 75%. These are the skills that we need to lead the next generation of work and leadership. It's certainly a huge skill gap indeed. And I circled the most overlooked gaps, one of them being driving inclusion. So I think not only do we have a lot of work to do around closing the gaps around some of these other people and strategic focused leadership characteristics, inclusion is a big part of this equation. And then the last trend, which has been a mounting priority for a growing workplace of millennials and Gen Zers. This isn't new, but this has been elevated and sits on this original premise that we talked about earlier, which is that organizations have a responsibility to impact social, humanitarian, and environmental issues. And so similar to the survey I just talked about earlier about leadership, Deloitte actually runs a survey as well around the emerging generations. And the message this year is crystal clear. The growing millennial and emerging workforce, or Gen Zers, have a strong and accountability-focused mindset on businesses' involvement in societal and humanitarian issues such as mental health, environmental issues, social disparities, and discrimination. And the importance of justice, equity, inclusion, and diversity will just be increasingly important as these Gen Zers are interacting with companies, looking for companies to work for, and then staying with companies that may or may not have a strong stance or purpose around some of these issues. So I want you to take a moment. I know we're running a little low on time, so we won't invite somebody to the stage, but maybe in your chat, if you could take a moment, and I just want you to share, what does your business stand for? And how are you or how is your company showing up for that cause? So it could be anything from environmental to societal to humanitarian. What are some things that your organization stands for, and how are you showing up? How are you living and breathing that and showing up every day to that cause? And actually, Jeff has let me know we do have some time. So if you do want to come up on stage, raise your hand. Would love to have you join. All right, Rachel. Let's get you on stage. Thanks, Rachel.
Oh, there we go. Hey, Angela. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on stage. What are your thoughts?
So I work for a startup company called CareerPoint, and we are looking to democratize coaching because a lot of times there's executive coaching available for the higher ups, and certain people have more access to mentoring or education and things like that. So we want to make career advancement coaching available across the board and kind of level that playing field. And we're finding, especially with this younger generation, they crave that feedback and they want that mentoring. So we're working with companies, but we're also reaching out to organizations and offering scholarships for them to get the career coaching that they need. So it's definitely a passion of ours to make sure that everybody has the opportunities and mentorship that they need to succeed and kind of prime the pump for these people who are going to be our future leaders.
Yes. And, I think we sometimes forget, with some of these programs, career development and walking the walk, is this surpasses our four walls within the company we work in, right? I mean, you're creating advancement, even economic opportunities for people in this process. So I think we have to think about this differently as we're developing this person's career for us. No, we're developing this group of people who may or may not stay with us, but we're potentially creating economic advancement, generational wealth. These are things that people are going to be interested in what organizations can provide them. And so this program that you're talking about, Rachel, is a great example of that. So thank you for sharing.
They want to feel invested in, and that makes them want to stay and be even better and support their team. It's a win-win all around.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel, for speaking up and coming on stage. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
So just to wrap up here, we're going to take your questions, but you may have noticed in some of the conversations, the connection, the intimate connection between all of these trends. They're all connected, but also there's also a theme around shaking up the traditional workplace. It's traditional standards and even our HR programs and policies, and thinking about it differently. Democratizing coaching, for example, is a great example of that. And so what we've done in the past just simply won't work for the future, nor do we want it, right? We are evolving and people are asking more of us. Talent is asking more of us, and honestly, the world is asking more of us. So if we want to create inclusive cultures, if we want to attract and retain diverse talent and create workplaces that are human and equitable, we have to lead the charge. We have to be the group that leads and role models and work with our leadership to evolve our thinking. So I really hope that this presentation was helpful. It was valuable. It kind of condensed and consolidated perhaps some of the many, many things that you're hearing out there as far as the changing world of work. But I would be happy to take any questions or any points of conversation. And feel free to put your question in the chat or speak up or raise your hand and we can call on you for a question.
Do you want me to ask a question? Oh, here we go. Oh, Rose is back. Okay.
Rose.
Hi, sorry, I'm dominating, but I do have a question. I assume that everybody here is personally connected to diversity, equity, and inclusion and see value in it. And as people and culture HR professionals, one of our key mandates is making sure that this is pulled through at our organizations. I'm curious, Angela, from you as everyone else here, what the approach is for people who may be kind of new to these discussions on executive teams and getting corporate buy-in. So, we care personally. How do you create a narrative where you have other people caring from a business, authentic, genuine perspective, and also seeing that it really is tied into the future success of your business?
Yeah, Rose, I'll provide my perspective, and feel free if you have some thoughts on this, place it in the chat. But I think it all comes back to our organizational identity work, right? And when I say organizational identity work, it is your vision, your mission, your values, your behaviors. What is the way of your company? And I think many of us have these great values on a wall that speak to inclusion, speak to equity. And I think where we lose touch a little bit is understanding that this work is a part of that. This is a part of the diverse experience within the workplace. And so I think the first thing is perhaps really getting clear about the behaviors that fall under your values. If you have values and no behaviors, that makes it really hard for everybody to get aligned and on the same page about inclusive behaviors. The other thing is, I know a lot of I've heard this before, but people say, your values don't change, those things don't change, but culture changes. I don't know, we're in a pretty pivotal change and movement at this point in time. So looking at your values, perhaps realigning on those values, and maybe even changing those values. I personally think that those can change. We are in a very massive transformation right now. And so I think now is the time to really touch base on those organizational identity pieces. And then also educate around the difference between equity and equality, educate around the history of the workplace as a system. All of those things are tough conversations to have. So I think just having the open dialogue and facilitating some open discussions around many topics over time can also help. Did that help, Rose? And that's just my perspective, but I would love to hear from others if you have thoughts. Jeff, if you have any thoughts too.
No, I think that's a great answer. I mean, I have another question, but I just want to just make sure that Rose, is okay with that answer, or if you have any other thoughts on that. Okay, Rose, I'm gonna kick you off the stage. Okay, sorry.
Gently.
All right. I do have a question though, Angela, for you. My perspective, it always comes back to technology, because obviously people are working from home or elsewhere, and and they have more flexibility, and so it's really important for companies and organizations to have the right technology tools so that they actually ensure that the employees are being productive and they're also included, right? So, what are your thoughts on that, on the role of technology, and its role that it needs to play? And then, is there a model that works?
Yeah, so on the point of technology, it is a powerful tool for inclusion, for including people regardless of geography. I think about things like where, in places where you had to perhaps live in bigger cities that cost a lot of money to work at these larger companies or these more well-known brands. Now you can be in rural Ohio and be working for Facebook, for example. It's opening up the geographic conversation around equity. And so that's the first piece. I think technology is a huge factor. And as far as a model that works, I think, I always go back to leadership. I always go back to leadership behaviors. I always go back to, are you creating a community of leaders who understand the value of inclusive leadership and people-centered leadership? And so that's not a model necessarily, but I think the model is, if you're going to focus on anything, focus on really equipping your leadership team, because they are the ones who are going to permeate your organization with this idea of inclusion, connectivity, communication, collaboration, and it needs to come from them versus the larger organization. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so, and I do appreciate that. I mean, that sort of leads me into my next question. Oh, somebody has a Q&A. So Megan has a great question. So Megan's question is, well, Megan, do you want to come on stage, or do you want me to just ask it? Here we go. Megan, all right, you're on.
Hey, Megan.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. I wasn't sure whether the question was fully relevant, but I think it is. When I joined Flash Food, I realized that the demographic was very young. And so as we're growing our HR team and our other teams across the organization, we're really trying to be strategic about bringing people in with a more diverse background, more experience. And I'm finding it a little bit of a challenge on both sides. One from, a very young tech company trying to integrate into, a more mature company, if you will. I'm trying to choose my words wisely here. And for those people that are joining, I'm finding not as, or need more hand support with some of the new technology and making sure that they don't feel like they're outliers coming into a company that visually looks very young or maybe feels very young. So I'm wondering if anyone else has experienced that, or maybe how to navigate it.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to some key principles around inclusion. Hey, Megan.
That's right. I could do that myself.
One of the tactical elements that I've seen that has worked well is, pairing people up who are very different so they can learn from each other. So your more mature generation, your younger generation, both can learn things from each other, right? Your mature, experienced folks are going to be seasoned. They understand how to navigate the workplace. Your younger generation might be questioning some of those traditions and also can help with the technology, for example. So I think that's one just tactical piece is anytime you want people to learn or understand each other's experiences, bring them together. Does anybody else have any other thoughts as to how? I know we've been talking conceptually a lot, but how can you, for Megan's question, provide some inclusivity with multiple generations in the workplace? Any thoughts?
I like your suggestion. We actually do that where we try a buddy system or an informal mentorship program for that exact reason. But I love it. I would welcome anybody else.
Yeah, and the other thing—
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry, Angela. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was a quick one. I'll bounce it back to you, Jeff. Another thing is, and the principle around this, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if it's generational, any demographic, really, the more you help people understand each other's experiences and bring humanity into the conversation, learning about people on the human level is, I think, the way to go. And however you could do that to create connectivity, whether it's through technology, whether it's through the buddy system or mentoring, I think that can be a good first step.
Awesome.
What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, just from a tech, a tech standpoint, I mean, it's really important that, yes, you've got all these great tools, but what I've always done that I think is really important is that, people need to be trained, and also they need to feel that they can, ask questions, about how to optimize, these tools, because quite often, I mean, your natural instinct is to just say, well, this is too complicated for me, so I'm not going to do it, and I'm going to fall back to what I know. And that, while that's easy, it doesn't help the organization going forward to, really push those boundaries. So that's why change management is just 101, right? Is being able to have the and open dialogue. But one of the things too I've asked people is that one of the reasons why that they might be slow to adopt technology that's being used by the organization is because they don't want change, but they also feel embarrassed to ask questions. So that's why you need to so I've always and that's going to lead me to my question about what role is what is HR's role in all of this, because really we can come up with policy, program, guide, whatever it is, but at the end of the day, what's our role to actually make stuff happen?
Yeah, I think you talk about change management, which is a great piece. I always call it people readiness. And I think a key part of our role as HR practitioners is to make sure the organization is future-proofed and the people are ready. And so what does that mean? And actually it relates directly into equity, right? So understanding your audience, understanding the different demographics. It could be by role, it could be by experience, doing that persona work to make your people readiness and your change management process more human-centric, knowing there's going to be differences. There's not going to be a blanket solution to any type of change. You really have to do the work up front to understand who you're speaking with and what their experience is.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you, Megan. Appreciate the question.
All right. So we still have a couple more minutes. So does anybody else have any questions? And I can ask another one. I mean, I have, some questions here that, I can ask, or does anybody else have a burning question that they would like to ask? Angela, please put it in the Q&A. Okay. Not, okay. Yeah, I'm going to ask a bit of a different question here, for you, Angela. Does anything around the current transformation concern you when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is all of it positive?
Yeah, that's a great question. I touched on it earlier, I think when we were talking with Rose. and kind of going back to that article again, some of the research that's coming out around who is choosing to flock back to the office and who is putting a real stake in the ground around, working from home, having flexibility is what I need. I feel like I belong in that scenario. So, again, white men being the ones who mainly are like, I want to go back to the office because it was built for me. I like being in the office, versus folks who potentially have been code switching for their entire career and now finally feel some peace that they can really be themselves and be authentic by leaning into flexibility, leaning into a flexible work environment. So my biggest fear, quite honestly, is that is going to create a wider gap of disparity where you're going to have an even larger gap between who is noticed, who is promoted, who gets the opportunities, because they are going to be the ones who are front and center and have all the face time. So I think that absolutely, when you're talking about choice in working from home or working remotely or a hybrid work environment, that has to be a part of the conversation to ensure that everyone is getting the same opportunity and we're not letting our biases get in the way of inclusive, equitable, and diverse work climates.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I'm just looking at time, but there's been some really interesting comments in the chat. Ashley Harrison, Ashley, do you want to come on stage and just talk about your comment? You can if you want, and I can, bring you on stage. You're talking about, featuring employees and their stories as part of your talent brand. So talent brand is just another term for, employer brand, employment brand. You can call it what you want, and, can have great internal impact, especially in the remote a work environment. So I'm really interested, Ashley, have you done some work around this that you can share with the audience or not?
Oh, I thought you were I'm sorry, you were talking to me. Yes. So personally, yes, I think that's a great idea. I've used that with my clients in the past when we're thinking about our employer value proposition, where we're trying to tell story about culture and what we offer. So you could talk all day, right, about how great your company is and have all the fancy messaging, but when you really bring it down to the human level and someone is able to tell their personal story about how that's impacted them individually, it speaks volumes. We humans, we love storytelling, and we love to go from conceptual to how has this impacted you. So I absolutely love that idea. I think it's a great way to bring the human into the equation, but also it heightens the brand of the company and the EVP, the employee value proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you have an example of a company that does that well? Maybe in the US or?
Oh, that's a great question. Trying to think of a
I mean, we
specific
can do some
example.
research on this. I mean, I've
Yeah.
done some work around this too. I mean, I do mostly in Canada, but I mean, but it's the same concept. I mean, it doesn't have to be a Canadian company. It can be anyone. But yeah.
Yeah, I would have to put some thought into that, but I think if I can kind of just think about the companies that I've seen kind of actively on LinkedIn, actively on social media, it's really some success factors I've seen, multiple levels within the company, not just highlighting your executives or your leadership team, focusing on your production worker, your support worker, different levels within the organization, and then also having them share something personal that has been an opportunity to interact with the way the company is contributing to their work experience or even their personal experience.
Yeah.
So those two things I think are really important with those features if you decide to do that. And then also getting your internal team involved and excited. So it's kind of a groundswell opportunity. So once you start featuring people will start to say, hey, I would love to share my story too. But having some role modeling and allowing the groundswell to happen and highlighting people internally as well as a part of your messaging.
No, it's a great point. So I just want to just wrap up this session, but is there any last final comment, Angela, that you want to impart we'll mention to the audience, before we move forward with the next part of our program?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm just honored to be here. I really enjoyed the discussion. I enjoyed folks who were able to come on stage. I wanted to provide my contact information if you want to continue the discussion, but I would just say that we are at a tipping point. I know we can all feel it, and I really hope that this provided some structure to thinking through these issues and provided some next steps or some tactics around how we can go into the next sessions and really create some change and rethink how we're thinking about some of these trends. So just honored to be here, and thank you for having me.